Greetings, everyone. This is Ehav Ever, and today's video is going to be about a comparison between Torath Mosheh and atheism. Now, this actually came up because I recently had a question on one of my previous videos that I recently completed, and the question that I got was, what is my view about atheism? Now, the thing that's interesting about this is that in reality, I have no view whatsoever on atheism. To explain this, because I know people will hear that like, well, what do you mean? I mean, if you've watched any of the previous videos I've done, I have a lot of different views and talk about a lot of different things on a lot of different topics. But with atheism, it's just kind of a different situation. And I think this video may help in explaining why, from a Torath Mosheh perspective, I don't really have a view on atheism. Now, in order to understand why I'm going to be talking about some of the things I'm talking about in this video and why I say that I don't have a real view on atheism, I think you have to first understand the concept of subjective truth versus objective truth. This is the thing that comes up with any kind of discussion between religious people and atheists. Now, as I mentioned in previous videos, I don't hold or subscribe to the concept of religion as it's understood in the Western world. And basically what I see as this debate between religious and atheists comes when one side says, one group of claims, where the other side says, nope, it's this way, not that way. And there seems to be almost like a need to debate or argue this point out from both sides. And the basic issue that sometimes seems to get lost in the discussion is about what exactly the truth is, not what everybody's opinion is or view is, but what is the truth? Because you have some situations where something could be true and people could be looking at the same thing as truth from two different perspectives and never meet in the middle because they're looking from their own internal perspective of what the truth is. And it could be that their perception of the truth is correct in a certain way. But it also could be that the other person's concept of the truth is correct in the same way also. But just unless people are willing to kind of say, okay, well, let me open up my horizons and understand the other person's perspective, maybe they can understand it better. And I'll kind of cover that in this video. And the same issue about subjective truth versus objective truth, where, for example, with this graphic showing with the subjective truth, you have a situation where, for example, a person looks at a flower and says, because I think there's only one flower, there's only one flower. Where an objective truth is where someone would say, for example, which is on the right, there's only one flower whether I think so or not. Meaning that there's one side where you could say that the truth is influenced by your perspective, where the other issue is that the perspective that you have is controlled by the truth and is basically influenced by the truth. So in order to, I guess, like really deal with this issue, I'm going to do something that I think is the most important thing to do with a discussion of this nature, and that's to be, the issue of understanding, okay, well, what exactly do atheists say about themselves? How do they define themselves? Because it'd be, really, I guess it wouldn't be correct for me to come out and say, okay, well, atheists are this, when, atheists are the people who determine who they are. I don't get to determine who they are. They determine for themselves who they are. So getting into that, coming from the American Atheist, I guess you could say organization, society, whatever you want to call it, when it comes to their own self-definition, their website states the following. Atheism is one thing, a lack of belief in gods. Atheism is not an affirmative belief that there is no God, nor does it answer any other question about what a person believes. It is simply a rejection of the assertion that there are gods. Atheism is too often defined incorrectly as a belief system. To be clear, atheism is not a disbelief in gods or denial of gods, it is a lack of belief in gods. Further, their website states, older dictionaries define atheism as a belief that there is no God. Clearly, theistic influence taints these definitions. The fact that dictionaries define atheism as there is no God betrays the monotheistic influence. Without the monotheistic influence, the definition would at least read, there are no gods. Now, going a little bit further, their site says the following. The only common thread that ties all atheists together is a lack of belief in gods. So I think this is a good definition. I think this is very clear about what exactly atheists are, and it comes from the American Atheist, Society or Association. So it's completely acceptable that this is the definition that meets their requirements, for example. And again, it's not for me to decide what they are or who they are. It's for them to decide that. Now, the next thing to consider, because I didn't want to just simply go by what American atheists just consider themselves, I decided to go, a little bit more international with it. So the Atheist Alliance International states the following. Atheism is very simply yet widely misunderstood. It's very simple but yet widely misunderstood. The word atheism comprises the word theism with the prefix a. So let's break it down. Theism is the belief in a god or gods. The prefix a means without or lack of. Therefore, atheism means without a belief in a god or gods, or a lack of belief in God or gods. So this is a little bit different than the American definition, but I guess, again, they're saying that this is the etymology of the word. Now they further go on and say, we often hear theists say, if you don't believe in a God, you must believe God does not exist. But this is simply wrong. Lacking a belief in a God does not entail believing that no gods exist. A person could reasonably say that she doesn't know if any gods exist, and there are none that she currently believes in. The issue is the single biggest misunderstanding about atheism. Fortunately, there is a neat way to show why it's wrong. A God either exists or it doesn't. There are only two possibilities. Now, to be honest with you, I completely agree with these definitions. The logic that they're using and how they define themselves and how they describe what it is that they're saying makes a lot of sense. Now, because usually when you talk about the word God, most people, I guess in the Western sense, think of some kind of person or human-like being that sits in like some kind of like space-time continuum, if you will, or even in the sky somewhere, and has physical attributes like a human, and basically human beings, I guess, are derivatives of this deity. This, is similar to ancient beliefs where, the deities at some places around the world had human features. Now whether this is their idea that they impress upon these deities their own understanding, their own features, or in their belief system it's the reverse, is up to them. But basically around the world in different settings, usually there was some physical form that was placed upon these deities, and even you could say their deities could be anything that's physical. And it makes sense based on what the atheists are saying that some of these ideas to some degree seem ludicrous when you deal with things from a scientific perspective, for example. Now, definition-wise, most dictionaries and encyclopedias define a god, for example, as what was the atheist perspective was discussing, in the following way: in monotheistic thought, God is conceived as a supreme being, creator deity, and principal object of faith. Now, the wording here is going to be very important as we continue. The earliest written form of the Germanic word God comes from the 6th century Christian Codex Argentinius. The English word itself is derived from the Proto-Germanic Gudan. The reconstructed Proto-Indo-European form, Gotoam, was likely based on the root gau, which meant either to call or to invoke. The Germanic words for God were originally noter. So I apologize if I'm kind of butchering the way that this is pronounced, but that's the best I can do with that. Now, further, they say in Christianity and other monotheistic religions, again, religion, the creator and ruler of the universe and source of all moral, the creator and the ruler of the universe and source of all moral authority, the supreme being. In certain other religions, a superhuman being or spirit worshipped as having power over nature or human fortunes, a deity. So one of the things you can get from this is that worship is a big part of it. Faith is a big part of this word God, as well as deity, and also moral authority. So these are the kind of ideas that come from the concept of a God, for example, that you basically could be talking about some being that's like human-like, has human qualities, that is a deity, specifically for the sake of worship. It's based upon faith, and that basically this issue, deals also with moral authority. So we've gone through the atheist perspective. We've gone through the meaning in most Western ideals about the word God. So let's take on Torath Mosheh. So in pretty much most of my videos, you may have mentioned Torath Mosheh, and in a previous video, a couple of them I defined what that is. So now I'm going to go into a lot more detail with that. Okay, so the basics. First of all, in terms of Torath Mosheh, the source of creation is not a human being or human-like. Torath Mosheh makes it very clear that basically the whole concept of being human is about researching and testing the truth, not belief or faith, the truth. And that gets into the next point of Torath Mosheh does not dictate or command belief or faith. And further, that the truth requires no missionizing. If something is true, it doesn't have to be missionized. It's just true because it is. Further to that, Torath Mosheh is not Judeo-Christianity. Judeo-Christianity is specifically, when you really get down to it, Judeo-Christianity is Christianity. It's not Judaism and Christianity and concepts of both. It's basically Christianity and the concepts of Christianity. And then further, Torath Mosheh is not a search for a God. So it's not like, for example, people look in the sky and say, okay, there's stars up there. What created them? It must have been a God. That's not the way Torath Mosheh works at all. Okay, so let's begin. How does Torath Mosheh define, if you will, the reality as it exists and what caused the reality? So one of the first things that's mentioned in the Torah is Bereshit Boro Elohim et hashemayim et haaretz. Now, basically, the thing we want to focus in on is the word Elohim. So, okay, most people, when they try to translate things into Hebrew, from Hebrew to English, the first thing they look and say, especially if they're looking for a Western audience acceptance, they try to say the word Elohim means God. Now, the problem with that is that the word Elohim does not mean God at all. When you want to get into like just the basics, the way Torath Mosheh perspective is that first of all, you're not dealing with a deity, you're not dealing with the concepts of faith, you're dealing with the source of creation, the source of reality, meaning that there is a universe, it exists, there is a reality that exists. Something caused it to exist. Now whatever you want to call that thing that caused it to exist, it's obviously not human. It's obviously not something that is human relatable. And we'll explain why in just a bit. But that there is something that caused creation to exist as it is. So we'll deal with the source of creation. And whatever that is, we'll accept that it is what it is based upon reality and based upon truth, if you will. So then if the Elohim does not mean God, for example, it does not mean deity, and any of those terms associated with the word God, what does Elohim mean? Well, first and foremost, if we wanted to deal with this from a linguistic perspective, the word in Hebrew, you could say almost like Jewish Hebrew, is Elohim. The way that's pronounced in Samaritan is Elohim. Now, further to that, Hebrew works upon a system of three-letter roots, meaning that ancient Hebrew used three-letter roots of the Hebrew alphabet in order to form a general, I guess you could say, definition of a word, and then from there words can be formed that either gets you into nouns or verbs. So the word Elohim, for example, comes from the three-letter root of Aleph, Vav, Lamed, or Aleph, Yud, Lamed. Now it's important to note that Hebrew is read from right to left. So the Aleph is the letter to the right. The Yud, for example, and the one to the far right, is in the middle, and Lamed is at the end, and then the next one is Aleph, Vav, Lamed. So if we're trying to understand what the word Elohim means, we first have to understand what these three-letter roots mean. So both of these three-letter roots mean, in English translating it, would be strength or power. Not any kind of association with a deity, not any kind of association with belief or faith, simply strength or power. So that being said, if we're looking at it from the perspective of what created the universe, what caused it to be, so we would be dealing with, okay, if someone says in their language, the Big Bang caused the universe to exist. In the Hebrew language, ancient and modern, Elohim would be the same as equaling to Big Bang. So if a person says, okay, well, what other terms could be used? Borei Olam is another term that's used in Hebrew. Same thing, that we're dealing with the source of creation. So you could say in one language it's the Big Bang, and in our language it's Elohim or Borei Olam. So what this means is, in short, is that Hashem is the source of all reality, i.e. the cause of reality. And at the moment, we're just simply dealing with linguistics. You say Big Bang, we say Elohim. You say Big Bang, we say Borei Olam. Essentially that you say the Big Bang caused the universe to come into existence. We say, well, that in our language is Elohim or Borei Olam. Okay, so again, when we get into the Big Bang, a lot of the information that's provided about what the Big Bang is conceptual. And the reason why we say it's conceptual is because the term Big Bang is simply a term. It's meaning that whether or not there was if something that you could be described in our physical sense as a bang, an explosion, okay, again, that's hard to come by because we're dealing with something that would have happened long before there were human beings around. I mean, most scientists believe that the universe got created within about 14 billion years ago. Interestingly enough, Jewish sources using the book was a book called Tehillim, which is the book of Psalms, also comes to that conclusion that the universe is about 14 billion years ago. There's a number of Jewish sources that make the calculation based upon things that are written in the book called Sefer Tehillim, which is also known in English as Psalms. So what that would mean is that if we're dealing with the source of creation, we're dealing with a situation that something caused the universe to go through stages until it got to the modern universe as we have it right now. There's a number of information that says, okay, that at this point, when the Big Bang happened. These are the kind of concepts of what happened. At this point, another thing happened. And that's the same thing that in the book of Bereshit, which is the first book of the Torah, is describing how the universe is created as the wording uses in 6 days. But Jewish sources are clear that 6 days are not like the way that we would understand 6 days, because again, it's dealing with something that of a simplified language to describe something that's a higher concept. And when I say higher concept, I can get into that probably in another video. But essentially, for example, the way the Hebrew text comes off is that it doesn't order in a way that makes like sense according to the English language. And the sages of Israel, the Chachamim of Israel, are very clear that the reason why that is because, for example, within the first day, it's mentioned as day one, and then the next way is day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day. So the question that comes up is why does it say day one, and then second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, and so on? And the reason given by many of the sages is that because in the first day, there was no concept of time. That, for example, the way that we conceptualize times didn't exist. So that, some sources say that there were like other things that were happening to that time. There were other things created during that time that we would never know because of the fact that it's so beyond our understanding. So again, if we're dealing with the source of creation, we're dealing with something causing the universe and the reality to exist as it does. Now, there are some people who say, okay, well, their vision of what created the reality is almost human-like, even if it's something of like a higher type being, like almost like a, if you read comic books, a Dr. Manhattan kind of thing. Well, the Torah is very clear. This is not the case. That the creator of all things is not human, has no human characteristics whatsoever, and cannot be described in human form, whether it be, for example, using almost like a comic book mode from Marvel Comics of like a universe that, makes up the body of the being that created it. The creator of all things has no human form and has no form that we understand and is not human in any way. So inserting our own visual concepts of like eyes and hands causing the universe to be created and a body, that doesn't exist. Further to that, Torath Mosheh is very clear, the creator has no emotions. You look and say, okay, a person, people have emotions. They, get sleepy, embarrassed, sad, mad, angry. That the Torah is very clear that the creator of all things does not change. The creator of all things has no emotions, but is the creator of emotions. So the first thing people say is, okay, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Why would that be the case? Well, if you think about it, if the creator, is not subject to its creation, meaning that the creator of all things created something or caused something to come into existence, well, obviously, if it created molecules, there's no reason for it to have molecules in it. If the source of creation, for example, caused stars to exist, it would make sense that the creator of all things is not consistent of stars. If the creator of all things created our ability to have emotions, to have intellect, well, there's no reason to say that it has a human intellect in the way that we understand it. So the obvious question that people would say is, well, wait a minute. Doesn't the Torah, doesn't all of these like texts, the Jewish texts, mention the creator having emotions and things like that? Well, Jewish sources are very clear that this is the language of men, meaning that the creator of all things caused the text to be written, at least specifically the Torah, to be written in a way so that it deals with human language as we understand it. So for example, one of the things we say is, okay, well, the creator is like a father to us. We say Avi, Avinu. That's not to mean that the creator of all things is literally our father. It's just simply that's the perspective we come away with it because of all the things the creator has created and given to us. I mean, it's like someone saying, okay, well, the oxygen in the air, I didn't create that stuff. The water, the ability for the laws of physics to exist, I didn't create any of that stuff. The source of creation caused that to happen. So therefore, I'm going to look at the source of creation as a father figure, the same way that I have a father, because that's the best I can use to understand the universe as it exists. These are just the language of men, and it's either use the language that people are used to, use the language that for, whether it be ancient times, modern times, or future times, people could understand, or you have a bunch of mathematical equations that nobody could understand except for the very learned. And even then, that might change from generation to generation about, who could understand it the best. Now, one thing that's very important, and this is mentioned in a text called the Kuzari. The Kuzari was written a number of hundreds of years ago, and one of the things it deals with is the idea that the Torah cannot contradict what is seen and proven to be true. Now, we must be clear that this is dealing with what is seen and proven to be true, not things that, for example, are, theorized. So someone may say, well, I have the theory of this or the hypothesis of this. Well, the Torah can contradict something that's a theory or hypothesis, but the Torah can't contradict something that is proven to be true. And the Kuzari states it in this way, for those who understand Hebrew. Chalila la'el shetavo haTorah bema sheyidache ra'aya o mofet, ach tavo benifloot ושנות המנהגים לבורת הדבורים או להפוך הדבר אל דבר אחר. להורות על חוכמת בורא העולם ויכולתו לעשות מה שחופץ בעת שיחפוץ. So again, that's essentially describing the situation where the Torah is not here to contradict things that are proven to be true. So if anything that can be proven to be true, the Torah is not here to contradict it and make it seem as if, okay, well, ignore that thing that you know is true. Like, it's like saying if gravity is proven to be true in the way that, a simple human can prove it, we look out and see it happening every single day and it's fixed. It's something that happens and returns upon itself every single time without question over generation after generation. The Torah is not going to contradict those kind of things. Anything that the Torah mentions is something that either meets the laws of nature as we understand it, I take that back, not as we understand it, but as it's proven to exist and continually proven to exist, within the context that there are situations where the creator of all things can cause things to happen that seem to us to be outside of the rules of nature, but again, it could be the situation where we don't fully understand nature as much as we think we do. No different than how 1,000 years ago, someone who may have been a scientist may have said, okay, we understand nature completely as it is, and how we understand it is completely correct. And 1,000 years later, someone may say, those guys are crazy. How did they think that that was the reality? And another 1,000 years, someone may say, well, how did those guys think that was the reality? So, for example, the Torah is not here to contradict the things that are seen and proven to be true. Now, at this point, anyone who knows me knows that I dedicate a lot of time to studying the writings of the Rambam. The Rambam is a rabbi who was known as Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. He lived between about 1135 to 1204 CE. He's also the author of a number of works that deal with science, deals with Torah, deals with philosophy, that being texts that deal with also Jewish law and reason. He was real big on reason. And his authorship ranges from texts such as the Mishnah Torah, the Moria Nevuchim, his commentary on the Mishnah, also a book called Sefer HaMitzvot that deals with the 613 mitzvot from the Torah, and also a number of letters that he wrote to kind of explain the things he wrote in other texts, as well as to inspire different communities to use their reason and to basically continue on the path of keeping Torath Mosheh with the right kind of mindset. So the reason why I mention him is because if we're going to have this discussion, it's important to use to go over a number of quotes that he makes in a number of his writings. One of which being, do not consider it proof just because it's written in books. For a liar who will deceive with his tongue will not hesitate to do the same with his pen. Again, this is from Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, who wrote a number of texts dealing with the Torah, Halakha, the Jewish law, and also reason. Another thing that he mentioned once in one of his writings is the same is the case with those opinions of man, to which he has been accustomed from his youth. He likes them, defends them, and shuns the opposite views. Another thing he mentioned in another of his writings was, you will certainly not doubt the necessity of studying astronomy and physics if you are desirous of comprehending the relation between the world and providence as it is in reality and not according to imagination. So, if we continue to go on some of his writings, he mentions some things that I think will be very helpful in dealing with this issue of reason, of logic, and also the idea of what truth is. And again, the truth being the ultimate goal. So he mentions also another writing, every reasonable man ought to distinguish in his mind and thought all the things he accepts as trustworthy and say, this I accept as trustworthy because of tradition, and this because of sense perception, and this on grounds of reason. Anyone who accepts as trustworthy anything that is not of these three species, of him it is said, the simple believes everything. And that's being quoted from what's called Mishle, or in English is called Proverbs 14:15. Now he also mentions in his commentary on the Mishnah for Avot that you must accept the truth from whatever source it comes. So what this means is if the truth can be proven to come from a source, even if it's not a Jewish source, we accept it as the truth, but it has to be proven to be truth, and we accept that as truth. So for example, it's not a situation where only the rabbis have all the truth about every single thing that's out there. When it comes to the Torah, that is the case that we can find our sources of truth about the Torah, about the correct interpretation of it, the correct acceptance of it from the Torah. But if we're dealing with something like medicine or science, things that are part of the creation, the things that exist as a part of the reality, we can get those from anywhere. It's not like, okay, well, if I'm looking for a doctor who can help me because I'm sick, I don't have to go specifically to a Jewish doctor or a rabbi or anything like that. I can go to any doctor who is knowledgeable in that area. It doesn't matter where he's from. It doesn't matter who they are, she or he. Now, another thing the Rambam mentions that will also be very useful in this discussion is he mentions in another writing, specifically dealing with astrology. I think it was sent to a letter that was sent to like a number of rabbis in France. He says, similarly, it is not proper to abandon matters of reason that have already been verified by proofs, shake loose of them, and depend on the words of a single one of the sages from whom possibly the matter was hidden. Now, when he says sages, he's talking about rabbis of previous generations. Or there may, and he further says, or there may be an allusion in those words, or they may have been said with a view to the times and the business before him. A man should never cast his reason behind him, for the eye is set in front, not in back. So this is the perspective that is taken about the Torah concerning the truth, concerning about how one deals with the truth and how one accepts truth and searches out truth. The Rambam's quotes here I think are very helpful in dealing with this issue that we're not dealing with the concept of religion, we're not dealing with the concepts of faith, we're dealing with an issue of proving out the truth and knowing what the truth is no matter from what direction it comes from, and using our reason to be able to deduct the truth from every situation. So going forward, one could say, well, this is just the Rambam, like other Jewish texts mention a lot of things. Well, the views that he mentions are also found in what's called the Talmud. His views, come from his study of the Talmud as well as previous generations who also had information. I mean, a person might come back and say, well, wait a minute, aren't there things in the Talmud that are not scientifically accurate? Well, the reasoning behind that is very simple. There are situations in the Talmud where the people of that generation were using the science of their day. And that's a valid use of information. I mean, if that's what was available at the time, that's what was available. No different than in our time, in the modern time, we're using the science of our day, meaning that 1,000 years from now, someone may look at us in the 2000s and say, those guys were morons. For example, they put cell phones to their heads. Well, how did they not know that causes like this and that problem? That's crazy. They believed this thing. How did they not know that this was the reality? Well, they use the science of their day. Further, the things that the Rambam wrote are also mentioned in many of the writings of Rabbi Sayyad Gaon. So he also was a proponent of the logic and reason and science, and these are ideas that aren't just something that they created in their time, that it existed from the time that the Torah was given until the modern time and even before. So also, there's also these things are found in the Sefer Torath Chavot HaLevavot, which also describes some of these issues of how does one know about the source of creation and how these things work and about what the truth is and searching for the truth and using reason to find the truth. So let's deal with something that I think will help explain this a little bit better than someone may, kind of ask about concerning the issue of what I mentioned earlier about how the Torah does not require faith. It is not based upon it being a faith system, for example. There's a certain point where we have to look at this from a historical perspective. What I would say is that the first era of humanity, of modern humans, would be the era of belief, meaning that you had what's called Adam HaRishon, meaning the first modern human, for example. During his time, the creator of all things, according to the Torah and also according to Jewish tradition and text, he was given 6 mitzvot that essentially were the things of like how to manage himself within the reality that the creator created. So basically people who know this kind of know about the Noahide laws, but for some people who don't study certain texts don't know that the first human, Adam HaRishon, was created to exist within that concept of 6 mitzvot to manage his life. The next thing is that Noah, during the time of Noah, and after what's called the Mabul, that Noah, for example, was given additional mitzvah, which made it 7 mitzvot. Now, at a certain point, certain people went into what's called Avodah Zarah, which you see going to the top. Now, what flashed just a second ago, a little prematurely, was what's called Avraham HaIvri. Now, Avraham HaIvri had those 7 mitzvot that were originally given to Adam HaRishon and also the one that was added by Noah, but at his time, he added Brit Milah. Now, what happened was Avraham HaIvri is very interesting. Prior to his time, between the time of him and Noah, it's mentioned that there were a lot of people who had forgotten about the fact that the creator of all things, Elohim, Hashem, had created all things, and they had started doing Avodah Zarah, meaning that they had accepted the concepts that were false about how the universe was created, what created it, and also what forces were, working upon it. So, for example, this is the time when people started believing that all of these different stars, had like wills and rationals of their own, and that you could pray to the star, build a temple of that star, and all these things. There are people who believe that if you take this tree and carve it in this thing, well, that you are taking away some of the power from the source of creation, and you're using that power to be able to do whatever you want with it. You could put that, some people believe you could put that power in like objects like metal, gold, and things like that, or huge statues and things like that. So during his time, he was a person who walked away from all of that and used the scientific method to understand, what created the universe. He wanted to know what created reality. And over a number of years, basically he spent, I think, about 40 years researching what created reality. So at one point when he came to the conclusion, like, for example, that the sun created everything, he worshiped the sun. But then he researched it further and said, okay, wait a minute, the sun's only here during the day. It's not there at night. So the moon is there at night. Maybe the moon did it. So he went through all of this process until he came to the realization that there was only one source of creation. And that's when he started the process of basically taking on the path that had existed during the time of Adam and Rishon, also during the time of Noah, and he continued that process and he passed that on to his children, which were Yitzhak, Yaakov, also known as Israel. And during that time, you could say that all of this is leading up to the path of the error of belief, meaning that when Avraham had his situation and Noah had his situation, people could say, okay, I don't believe that. I don't see any proof for what you're talking about. So anyone who did kind of associate themselves with them as individuals or as their children, going on, would have accepted it based on belief, meaning that they didn't have any proof for themselves that what they were saying was correct. Now that started to change with one particular event, and that's what's called Yetziat Mitzrayim, meaning that when the descendants of Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, also known as Yisrael, were in a place called Mitzrayim, they were in a situation where a number of natural disasters hit Mitzrayim within a year, and they were all being predicted by a particular person named Moshe Rabbeinu, or Moshe ben Amram. So during that time when they saw these things happening, of him saying, okay, these things are about to happen, and then they would happen exactly as he said right after another, and then that Mitzrayim basically went through a very bad, disastrous period during that year, and they left. You could say that they were still under the idea of belief because of the fact that they didn't have a clear picture of what exactly caused it. Maybe this is just the way nature works. 10 things happened that destroyed Mitzrayim within a year. Okay, maybe that was going to happen anyway. Hurricanes, dust storms, all that stuff is just regular the way that nature works. And it's just going to happen this way anyway. So at this point, we get to what changed everything, and that's what we call the singularity of Torath Mosheh. The singularity is when all of the people of Israel, Am Yisrael, meaning the people who were descendants of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, also known as Israel, as well as a bunch of people who were not from lineage from them, who were in the Egyptian Mitzri society, had left and gone to a place called Har Sinai, or Mount Sinai. At that place, it was then that the source of creation spoke in a way that where they heard the voice of the Creator and saw the voice of the Creator, with Moshe ben Amram being down there with him and having no one out there creating this false sense of, okay, well, this guy's on the mountain talking and screaming out loud. We hear a voice, but that's just the voice of some guy up there. But they heard a voice that some sources say it spoke as if a million people were speaking at the same time. Other sources also say that, for example, that when the Creator spoke, the words of the Creator also appeared as if fire or lightning in the sky, so that people both heard it, felt it, and saw it at the same time, so that every person who walked out of there walked away with the same information and with the same experience to that event, to the point to where things kept returning upon themselves. So a person says, okay, first of all, we were in a place called Mitzrayim. In a year, all of these different things happened that took down the regime, and also basically were things that were in nature, but happened within a year where nobody could really predict that happening within 1 year in that way at the exact same times that they happen. We get to a place called the Yam Suf, the water splits. We see that every time that something happens, Moshe ben Amram is able to answer it with something that happens that seems to either be a manipulation of nature or to be outside of the way the natural world seems to work. That leads us back to this singularity, to when they get to Mount Sinai, with all of those things happening, the Creator speaks in a way to where they see the words of the Creator, they hear the words of the Creator, and everybody walks with the same experience. So it's not just one person experiencing, it's not just 10 people experiencing. You're talking about close to about 1 million people experiencing it. Fathers, sons, daughters, uncles, nephews, friends, cousins, things like that, to the point to where even after that event, things keep happening in a certain way where it keeps proving itself back and forth over and over and over again, similar to the scientific method that, basically it's like someone could say, okay, maybe I didn't see that, maybe I didn't hear that, but wait a minute, he heard it, she heard it, they heard it, everybody heard it, they saw it, we all saw the same thing, we walk away, we talk about it, we see the same thing. It proves itself over and over again. So in previous videos I mentioned that, and this is kind of taking back that point where the text says, "V'chol ha'am ro'im et hakolot ve'et halapedim ve'et kol hashofar ve'et har ha'oshen." So essentially what this is saying, that everybody saw the same thing. And the text, of course, as I mentioned in my previous video, mentions that everybody walked away saying that they saw and heard the same exact thing. So that even thousands of years later, when their descendants were dispersed amongst the nations, that essentially what you had is a situation where everybody came back with the same information and nobody thought to go and change it and say, okay, well, I don't like the way this is written here. Let me change it to here. Everybody had the same written and oral response to these events. So this leads us back to what I was mentioning earlier. So you have a situation where the Torah is given at Mount Sinai, at Har Sinai. It creates a situation of what's called Torath Mosheh, meaning the Torah of Moshe, and that the Torah of Moshe is the same thing as saying the Creator said it. Everybody heard the words of the Creator, saw the words of the Creator, and everybody agreed that, okay, this is too much. Moshe, you go up there and speak to the Creator. The Creator, says that you're the person who can, take this information, pass it down to us. Whatever the Creator says, we'll do it. After experiencing that major event, we're willing to, have you go and you speak to the Creator. So this created a situation where when Jews were dispersed away from the land of Israel, you had a situation where you had Jews from different regions who were in Yemen or Eden, known as Arabian Jews. You had Jews who were Mizrahi Jews from Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and other places. You had Sephardic Jews in North Africa, Southern Europe, and you also had Ashkenazi Jews. But all of these groups, upon bringing them back together, had the same Torah with very minor differences between them, and even those differences are not changing in the text. Only in some cases, the size of letter here, the size of a letter there. They basically have the same information, the same wording, and no one thought to change the order of the text, change the names in the text, change the circumstances of the text to fit their own needs. And a number of these communities were isolated to the point where they didn't even know the other community existed. They had no idea that, for example, a Jew in, let's say, Haban, Yemen, may not have had any idea that there was some Jew in Poland somewhere, or Jew in Russia, or in some part of Spain. They may have known by name of certain locations, but they wouldn't have had any information. They wouldn't have changed their text to fit the text of someone else somewhere else. Okay, so let's take all of that we've gone through so far and use a few examples of why, again, going back to the original point of why is it that I have no view about atheism whatsoever. Let's take a few examples that I think may help explain it, taking the Torath Mosheh mindset of how it explained how those things went down. Okay, so the first thing you get into is when you have the issue of what the truth is. They're, again, getting into the fact that some people say, well, the truth is subjective. Some people say the truth is objective. In the situation where someone may say, okay, well, let's go on a quest, and somebody says to find what? This is the truth. And someone says, oh, I already found that behind the couch. That's the graphic on the left. One person's looking at something and says 4. Another person looks at it from a different direction and says 3. Well, in this situation, they're both looking at the same thing. They're just simply looking at it from two different perspectives, but it's the same thing they're looking at. And if they switch places, they would say the same thing about it. And that's one of the issues when you deal with the truth, that there are some situations where people are saying the same thing from two different angles, but they're talking about the same truth. And there's no problem with them looking at it from two different angles and seeing two different things, but still describing the same thing that is true. All they have to do is simply switch places and see what they see at that point. So here's the example I want to use, and I use this quite a bit. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. When I was 10 years old, there was a World Series of Baseball in 1985. It was between the Kansas City Royals and the St. Louis Cardinals. It was the championship. And again, we're talking about baseball. So during that time when the championship was going on, and during that time there was a number of things that happened event-wise, but you had a large group of mass of people who were present at every single game until the finish when the Royals won the championship. So whether that be people from St. Louis, whether people from Kansas City, even probably some people from outside of either city, it's pretty widely known, by way of lots of information that the event took place. So what kind of things come out of an event like this? Well, first of all, you have official balls that are a part of the championship. A different balls that are signed by the different players, for example, that people have to this day. You have championship rings that come out of it. You have almanacs that are written about the event. You have events that took place that people can say, okay, I remember when this happened during that event. This controversial situation was what took place. This is one of the things I remember about it. Further to that, you have people who can say, hey, I was there. I was there. I saw it. I experienced it. I got memorabilia from it. Another person, you might have outside publications that come about describing the event. You have a situation where, for example, back then, you had playing cards, of the team that tells you who exactly was there when it happened. And then you also have just the basic memory of the victory itself and how it made you feel. Now, the information about what actually took place is, you could say the objective part of it. The subjective part of it could be, a person saying, okay, this is how I felt when the event took place. This is what I got out of it. Everybody agrees that the Royals won the championship. Nobody's like going to walk out there and say they didn't win it because they either won it or they didn't win it. A person can say, well, this is how I felt about it. I can say, for example, when I was a kid, I went to a school where I didn't like the school and everybody rooted for the Royals. So I rooted for the Cardinals just because of the fact that I went to a school that I didn't like and everybody was for the Royals and I voted for the Cardinals. Nothing personal against the Royals. That's the way I went because I didn't like my school. That's me, giving you a story about the event, not disagreeing that the Royals won, simply saying because of my situation, this is what I got out of the experience. Now imagine what would happen if someone were to say, okay, fine, you got all this stuff. There's all these articles that say, okay, the Royals, blah, blah, blah. The person says, okay, baseball. There's no such thing as baseball. Now, to a person who had all of that experience with the championship, with the Royals, and a person could say, okay, well, I don't believe there's such a thing as baseball. Not believe, take that back. I don't, there is no such thing as baseball. Someone says there's no such thing as baseball. Okay. A person who's experienced all those things with the championship, with the Royals, with the St. Louis Cardinals, a person could say, okay, well, you're saying that there was no championship between the Royals and Cardinals because there was no such thing as baseball. A person could say, yes, there's no championship between Royals and Cardinals because there's no such thing as baseball. A person could say, okay, well, that's fine. If that's what you believe, not a problem. Why do I care? So what? Who cares? A person who experienced all those things could care less, especially if you say, okay, the person who says there's no such thing as baseball, okay, when were they born? Maybe they were born after the championship. Where are they from? Okay, well, they're not from the place where the championship took place. Maybe they're not even from the country that the whole thing took place in. So what? Who cares? Another perspective is the whole debate that you hear about now about flat Earth versus round Earth. It's like the same kind of thing. Someone says, no, the Earth is flat. It's not round. As if it's a fact. Again, there's nothing wrong with somebody believing that the Earth is flat. The real issue is, so what? Who cares? You say it's flat? Not a problem. I do not care, especially if, let's say, if someone has experience knowing that it's like round, or it's spherical, if you will, or semi-spherical. A person can say, well, okay, believe what you want. It doesn't really matter to me. I've got enough information with me to be able to know that this is the truth and this is the reality until I am proven completely wrong with something that outweighs or trumps every little thing that I had prior that proved it to this point. And the basic issue comes down to something, there are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true, and the other is to refuse to accept what is true. And that's just simple, plain reality. So to close out this video, the first thing that I can mention is because Torath Mosheh is not based on a requirement of faith, there's no conflict with atheism. There's no conflict at all. Atheism, as they've described it, is what it is, and Torath Mosheh is what it is also. The concept of atheism is not relevant as a concept of Torath Mosheh because as I mentioned before, the idea of gods and all that kind of stuff, whether there is one or isn't one, is something of a religious versus atheist kind of, I guess, conflict. I think quite a bit of that deals with the politics of the whole idea of belief because, atheists may say, well, it doesn't make sense that all these laws are in the books in America or in a country like America when I don't believe, I don't hold by those things. There's no such thing as this thing. So why are the laws like, created in a way as if this thing is true when it's not true? That's perfectly fine. That's more of a political debate. But again, in terms of concept, it's not relevant, to Torath Mosheh. Torath Mosheh deals with the truth and it deals with the source of creation. And we all know that there is an existent world reality universe. So something caused it to be. Torath Mosheh deals with the source of creation, what it is. And in one language, it's the Big Bang. And, this language is Elohim or Borei Olam. Thus, there's no reason to consider atheism for any reason. So I will warn you ahead of time, even though this is the end of the video, that essentially I know that there are some people who would say, well, I'm just playing semantics. And I promise you, this is not semantics. This is just simply, there's a different perspective on how things are looked at. And, that's why I say that for those who hold by Torath Mosheh, atheism, it just isn't relevant. It's not a bad thing. It's not like a criticism of people who are atheist or people who are part of that. But Torath Mosheh doesn't deal with isms or ist, if you will, or ijin, getting religion. The issue is that Torath Mosheh deals with the things that I mentioned earlier about using reason, using the reasonable methods for the truth, and dealing with the truth as it is and as it's presented and as it is proven to be in reality. There's nothing wrong with hypothesis. There's nothing wrong with theory. But at the end of the day, The truth is either this or that. There's no in between. There's something either exists or it doesn't exist. The universe exists, something created it. Torath Mosheh at one point during the time of like the era of faith, as I mentioned before, dealt with that issue. But the minute that the Torah was given at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai, in a way that everybody who was there saw and experienced the same thing, that changed that reality to something different. And that's one of the reasons that you don't find a claim of millions of people being at a situation and in dealing with the fact that the source of creation presented itself in a certain way to them. You don't find that, around the world. You only find that in one place, and that's dealing with the Torah. So this is Ehav Ever. Thank you for listening to this video, and leave your comments or anything like that. So thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.